The bells of Ravenscroft Palace still rang every Sunday morning, yet no one remembered when they had last sounded joyful. Their deep bronze voices drifted across emerald lawns, over marble fountains, and through endless corridors lined with gilded portraits, but they echoed inside a house where laughter had become a forgotten language. Servants walked softly as though afraid to disturb invisible ghosts. Footmen lowered their voices until whispers became the palace's ordinary conversation. Even the fireplaces seemed to burn more quietly, their flames casting warm light upon rooms that had long surrendered to sorrow. 3 years had passed since Duchess Isabella Ravenscroft had closed her eyes forever. She had not died in scandal nor in violence, but after a relentless fever that stole her strength day by day until even the finest physicians admitted defeat. During her final hours she had smiled only once, asking her husband to promise that their children would never grow up believing love had abandoned them. Duke Nathaniel Ravenscroft had given that promise with tears streaming down his face. It was the only promise he had failed to keep. Nathaniel, 38, had once been admired throughout England for his easy smile, thoughtful generosity, and devotion to his family. Those who had known him before the tragedy barely recognized the man he had become. His dark hair had begun to silver at the temples far too early, while exhaustion permanently shadowed his steady blue eyes. He governed his estates with flawless discipline, settling disputes, expanding harvests, and ensuring every tenant received fair treatment. Yet the moment he crossed the palace threshold each evening, the capable duke disappeared, replaced by a widower who no longer knew how to reach his own children. Charlotte, his eldest daughter, had just turned 10. Before her mother's illness, she had danced through every corridor in satin slippers, convincing servants to applaud imaginary performances inside the ballroom. Since the funeral, she had folded away every ribbon, every music book, and every pair of dancing shoes. She spoke politely whenever required, but the brightness that had once filled her hazel eyes had quietly vanished. Henry, 8 years old, insisted he no longer cried. He climbed trees alone, wandered the stables for hours, and spent entire afternoons carving little horses from scraps of wood with surprising patience. Stable hands often found him sitting beside his favorite mare, speaking softly into her mane because animals never asked painful questions. Whenever anyone mentioned his mother, he simply nodded and walked away before tears could betray him. Little Lily was only 6. Every night she carried her mother's pale blue shawl to bed, refusing to sleep without wrapping it around her shoulders. The fabric no longer carried Isabella's perfume, yet Lily insisted it still smelled like home. Housemaids gently tried replacing it with newer blankets embroidered in silk, but each morning they found them neatly folded on the floor while the faded shawl remained clutched inside the child's tiny hands. Their grief had become the rhythm of the palace. Tutors resigned after weeks of silence. Governesses departed in frustration. Music teachers packed away untouched instruments. Artists abandoned unfinished portraits because the children refused to smile. Even birthdays passed with little celebration beyond polite applause over untouched cakes. Nathaniel blamed himself for every quiet room. He convinced himself that if he had loved his wife more fiercely, prayed more desperately, or searched harder for another physician, perhaps she would still be walking these halls, laughing beside the children as sunlight poured through the ballroom windows. Regret became a constant companion, sitting beside him at every meal and following him through every sleepless night. His elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Ashcombe, watched the family with increasing concern. "The children do not need stricter lessons, Your Grace," she said one gray afternoon. Nathaniel looked up from estate papers. "What they need no governess has managed to give them." "And what is that?" She hesitated. "Permission to be children again." Her words lingered long after she quietly left the study. Within days, another advertisement appeared in London's newspapers. Experienced governess wanted. Patience essential. Kindness required above all else. Many applicants arrived wearing expensive gowns and rehearsed smiles. Noble ladies praised their education, their etiquette, and their accomplishments in flawless French. One boasted of teaching princes. Another carried glowing recommendations from influential families. The children rejected every one of them. Charlotte answered questions with cold politeness. Henry disappeared before lessons began. Lily hid beneath tables until the visitors departed. Weeks stretched into months. Then, on a bright summer morning scented with climbing roses, an ordinary carriage rolled through the palace gates. No family crest decorated its weathered doors. No liveried servants accompanied it. Only one modest trunk rested behind the driver. From the carriage stepped Miss Eleanor Whitmore. She was 26, graceful without trying to appear so, dressed in a neatly mended dove-gray traveling gown whose careful stitching revealed both poverty and dignity. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply beneath a straw bonnet, while intelligent green eyes quietly observed everything around her. She carried herself with calm confidence rather than fashionable elegance, offering a warm smile to the stable boy who nervously reached for her luggage before thanking him as though he were doing her a great favor instead of merely performing his duties. Mrs. Ashcombe noticed immediately. Most applicants greeted the Duke first. Miss Whitmore greeted the servants. Nathaniel met her inside the library. Unlike the others, she did not flatter the palace or admire its paintings. She simply listened while he described his children. He spoke of silence, of sleepless nights, of birthdays without laughter, of empty nurseries filled with untouched toys. He expected pity. Instead, Eleanor remained thoughtful. When he finished, she asked only one question. When did they stop believing childhood was safe? Nathaniel blinked. No physician, no tutor, no noblewoman had ever asked that. I do not know. She nodded gently. Children do not forget happiness, Your Grace. They simply hide it until someone convinces them it is welcome again. For the first time in years, Nathaniel felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his grief. Not certainty. Not hope. Only the faintest possibility. Mrs. Ashcombe escorted Eleanor upstairs to the modest bedroom prepared for the newest governess. The room overlooked the eastern gardens, where roses climbed ancient stone walls beneath the afternoon sun. It lacked luxury but welcomed quiet reflection. Eleanor unpacked only a few treasured books, neatly folded dresses, and one small wooden music box worn smooth by time. She placed it beside the window without opening it, then stood watching swallows circle above the gardens while distant laughter from village children drifted beyond the estate walls. A wistful smile touched her lips before fading into silent determination. That evening, after supper had ended in familiar silence, Eleanor sat alone beside her bedroom window, reading by candlelight. Outside, moonlight silvered the sleeping gardens, while somewhere deep inside the palace an old grandfather clock marked each passing hour. Just as she turned another page, a floorboard creaked beyond her door. Then another. She quietly rose and opened it. Standing in the dim corridor were Charlotte, Henry, and little Lily, barefoot in their nightclothes, saying nothing at all. They simply stared at the stranger with solemn, searching eyes, as though trying to decide whether this woman, like all the others before her, would disappear by morning. The three children did not speak that first night. Charlotte stood protectively in front of her younger siblings, her chin lifted with quiet determination. Henry folded his arms, pretending confidence he did not feel. Little Lily clutched her mother's faded blue shawl beneath one arm while studying Eleanor with enormous, cautious eyes. Eleanor smiled gently. I was wondering, she said softly, whether Ravenscroft Palace always receives visitors in bare feet. Henry glanced downward. Only then did he notice they were all standing barefoot on the polished corridor floor. Lily hid behind Charlotte. Henry muttered, We wanted to see. See what? If you'll leave. The words carried no anger, only certainty. Eleanor felt her heart tighten. Instead of promising she would stay forever, she simply nodded. I suppose you'll find out. She wished them good night before quietly returning to her room. The children remained outside another few moments before disappearing into the darkness. The following morning, sunlight spilled across the palace gardens like warm honey. Instead of announcing strict lessons, Eleanor asked the cook for 3 empty baskets. The elderly cook looked puzzled. What are those for, Miss Whitmore? I'm borrowing the morning. Within minutes she found the children lingering separately throughout the estate. Charlotte sat alone beneath an ancient oak reading without turning a single page. Henry was repairing a broken birdhouse. Lily wandered beside flower beds, absent-mindedly dragging her mother's shawl through the grass. Eleanor approached with a basket. I need experts. No one answered. She continued anyway. The palace gardeners tell me butterflies only visit the happiest flowers. Henry frowned. Flowers don't smile. Perhaps that's why they need our help. Charlotte finally looked up. What help? We're going searching. For what? The first signs of spring. Henry glanced around. It's already summer. Eleanor smiled. I wasn't talking about the weather. Curiosity quietly defeated resistance. Without another word, all 3 children followed her into the gardens. She asked them to collect anything beautiful. Not expensive. Not rare. Simply beautiful. Charlotte found white rose petals. Henry gathered smooth river stones from the fountain. Lily proudly carried tiny yellow wildflowers growing between old paving stones. By noon their baskets overflowed with forgotten treasures. Instead of returning inside, Eleanor spread a large blanket beneath the oldest maple tree. "What now?" Henry asked. "We build something." "What?" "A memory garden." The children exchanged confused glances. Using petals, stones, leaves, feathers, and flowers, Eleanor invited each child to arrange a small picture on the blanket. Charlotte carefully created a dancing lady surrounded by roses. Henry built a little wooden horse using twigs. Lily made a crooked heart. "What does yours mean?" Eleanor asked. Lily looked down. "It's home." No one spoke. The breeze gently stirred the flowers. Eleanor carefully added one tiny daisy beside Lily's heart. "Every home," she whispered, "deserves something growing inside it." For the first time, Charlotte smiled. It lasted barely a second. But Henry noticed. So did Lily. Neither said anything. That afternoon rain suddenly swept across the estate. The children expected lessons to end. Instead, Eleanor hurried them toward an unused drawing room overlooking the gardens. She opened cupboards no one had touched in years. Inside lay forgotten ribbons, old paper, colored ink, scraps of lace, broken toys, and dusty boxes. "It looks like a treasure cave," Henry whispered. "Exactly." 4 hours they folded paper boats. They built tiny castles. Charlotte painted windows onto cardboard houses. Henry designed impossible bridges. Lily insisted every house needed flowers. When the rain eased, Eleanor carried a silver basin onto the terrace. They floated every paper boat together. Henry's immediately tipped over. Lily burst into giggles. Henry tried looking offended. Instead, he laughed too. The sound echoed across the courtyard. Stable boys stopped working. Kitchen maids looked through open windows. Gardeners slowly lifted their heads. None of them had heard young Master Henry laugh in nearly 3 years. Inside his study, Nathaniel froze. He looked up from estate ledgers. Was that laughter? Unable to stop himself, he quietly followed the sound through silent corridors until reaching the terrace doors. He remained hidden behind heavy velvet curtains. Outside, Henry was trying to rescue his paper boat with a stick. Charlotte laughed whenever he nearly fell into the basin. Lily clapped so enthusiastically she nearly dropped her mother's shawl. Eleanor laughed with them instead of correcting them. Nathaniel watched without breathing. No lessons. No lectures. No expensive entertainment. Only paper boats. And somehow, the impossible had happened. That evening he thanked Eleanor politely during supper. She simply answered, "The children did everything themselves." They were laughing. They remembered how. Nathaniel lowered his eyes. I had forgotten that sound. After supper, Eleanor discovered Lily asleep inside the library window, still holding the old shawl. She gently covered the child with a blanket. Instead of removing the faded cloth, she carefully smoothed its edges. Nathaniel happened to witness the moment. "I've asked everyone to replace that old thing," he admitted quietly. Eleanor shook her head. "It isn't fabric." "What is it?" "A bridge." "A bridge?" "Between the child she was, and the little girl she's trying to become." Nathaniel stared silently. No doctor had ever explained grief so simply. The following morning Eleanor surprised the children again. No books waited inside the classroom. Instead 3 aprons rested neatly upon the table. Henry groaned. "Cooking? Baking? That's worse." "We'll see." The palace kitchen had never been so lively. Flour dust floated through golden morning light. Charlotte carefully measured honey. Henry kneaded dough with unnecessary force. Lily proudly cracked eggs while accidentally dropping half the shells into the bowl. Everyone laughed. Even the stern head cook eventually smiled. Soon the warm fragrance of fresh honey biscuits drifted through every corridor. Lily suddenly became quiet. "My mama made these." The room fell silent. Eleanor placed another spoonful of honey into the mixture. "Then today," she said softly, "she taught us too." No tears followed. Only peaceful silence. When the biscuits finished baking, the children insisted on carrying the first plate themselves. Instead of taking them upstairs, Henry knocked upon the Duke's study door. Nathaniel looked up. 3 nervous faces waited outside. Charlotte stepped forward. "We made these." "For me?" Henry shrugged awkwardly. "There are too many." Nathaniel accepted the warm biscuits. For a long moment none of them moved. Then Lily reached forward. She brushed flour from her father's sleeve. The tiny gesture nearly shattered him. He gathered all 3 children into his arms. No words came. None were needed. From the hallway, Eleanor quietly witnessed the embrace before slipping away unnoticed. That evening, Charlotte knocked softly upon Eleanor's bedroom door. She carried a small wooden music box covered in dust. "It doesn't play anymore." "It belonged to your mother?" Charlotte nodded. "Papa couldn't fix it." Eleanor carefully accepted the delicate keepsake. "I'll try." Late into the evening, she patiently cleaned tiny gears beneath candlelight. Finally, a gentle melody filled the room. Not perfectly, not loudly, but beautifully enough. The next morning, the music box rested outside Charlotte's bedroom with a handwritten note. "Some songs only sleep. They don't disappear." Charlotte hugged it tightly against her chest before quietly looking toward Eleanor across the corridor. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. Later that afternoon, the children gathered in the old ballroom, where sunlight poured through towering windows onto polished marble floors that had remained empty since their mother's final dance. Eleanor simply placed the repaired music box upon a nearby chair and wound its tiny key. The familiar melody drifted gently through the vast room. Charlotte instinctively took Lily's hands. Henry began clapping in uneven rhythm. Eleanor laughed as the girls spun around her in delighted circles, their dresses swirling through warm golden light. Hidden beyond the half-open doorway, Nathaniel stood perfectly still, unable to look away. His daughter's laughter echoed across the silent ballroom while Henry applauded like an excited audience of one. Then, without thinking, little Lily threw her arms around Eleanor's waist, looked up with shining eyes, and whispered one trembling word that reached both women and the unseen Duke beyond the doorway. "Mama." The word lingered in the ballroom long after Lily had spoken it. Eleanor knelt immediately, gathering the little girl into a gentle embrace before softly brushing a curl away from her forehead. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, "your mama was someone precious and no one could ever take her place. I can love you very much, but I will never ask you to forget her." Lily nodded against Eleanor's shoulder without crying. Somehow those quiet words eased the ache instead of deepening it. Hidden beyond the doorway, Nathaniel closed his eyes, overwhelmed not by the mistaken name but by the tenderness with which Eleanor protected Isabella's memory. After that afternoon, nothing obvious changed, yet everything felt subtly different. The palace remained orderly, the servants continued their duties, and lessons resumed each morning, but warmth now drifted through the corridors like sunlight finding forgotten windows. Charlotte no longer walked with bowed shoulders. Henry whistled while feeding the horses. Lily skipped between rooms carrying both her mother's shawl and Eleanor's hand whenever she was allowed. The children also began sharing mysterious glances whenever the adults were not looking. One evening, Charlotte quietly closed the nursery door after supper. "We need a meeting," she announced. Henry folded his arms. "About what?" "About Miss Whitmore." Lily smiled immediately. "I love meetings." Charlotte lowered her voice. "Papa smiles when she's near." Henry looked surprised. "He does. I've seen it." Lily nodded eagerly. "He watches from doors." The three children sat together on the carpet beneath the nursery window. Charlotte finally whispered the thought none of them had dared speak aloud. "I think Papa is lonely." Silence followed. Even Henry could not argue. "And I think," Charlotte continued, "Miss Whitmore is lonely too." Lily tilted her head. "So we fix it." Henry blinked. "How?" Charlotte's eyes sparkled with determination. "We help them." Thus began the greatest secret ever kept inside Ravenscroft Palace. The following morning, Henry deliberately asked Eleanor to teach him how to carve birds instead of horses. "I've never carved one," she admitted. "Then we'll learn together." Nathaniel happened to pass the workshop window and paused. He watched them laugh over crooked pieces of wood until Henry proudly held up something resembling an oversized duck. "It looks terrible," Henry groaned. "It looks brave," Eleanor replied. "Brave? It isn't afraid of being imperfect." Nathaniel smiled despite himself. Later that afternoon, Charlotte invited Eleanor into the long-abandoned music room. Dust still covered the polished piano, but sunlight painted bright rectangles across the floor. "My mother wanted to teach me this dance," Charlotte said quietly. "We never finished." Eleanor hesitated. "I don't know every step." "Neither do I." "Then perhaps we can learn together." Charlotte placed the repaired music box upon the piano. Its gentle melody floated through the room. Slowly, awkwardly they practiced. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes they stumbled. Neither cared. Outside the half-open door, Nathaniel watched only a moment before walking away, unable to trust the emotions filling his chest. That evening Henry secretly added another drawing to the growing collection hidden beneath his bed. Every picture showed the same 5 people. His father, Charlotte, Lily, himself, and Eleanor. No matter the season, she always stood in the middle holding someone's hand. Meanwhile, Lily developed her own quiet tradition. Every morning before breakfast she picked one flower from the gardens and left it outside Eleanor's bedroom door. She never knocked. She simply ran away giggling. Eleanor never discovered who left the blossoms, although she treasured every one inside a tiny crystal vase. Mrs. Ashcombe noticed everything. One afternoon she found Henry sneaking another flower toward the staircase. "You've become quite the gardener." Henry grinned sheepishly. "It's classified." She raised one eyebrow. "Oh." He leaned closer. "We're growing happiness." The old housekeeper smiled without asking another question. Several days later the family attended the annual summer picnic beside a sparkling lake on the estate. Blankets covered the grass. Fresh strawberries, warm bread, roasted chicken, and lemonade filled woven baskets. Village musicians played cheerful melodies beneath towering elm trees while tenants greeted their duke with grateful respect. Charlotte quietly caught Henry's eye. He understood immediately. Without warning, all 3 children slipped away between the trees. Nathaniel noticed first. "Charlotte." No answer. "Henry?" Only birdsong. "Lily?" Silence. Eleanor rose instantly. "We should search separately." Nathaniel nodded. Together they followed winding woodland paths lined with ferns and wildflowers. After several minutes clouds drifted across the sky, releasing a gentle summer shower. Rain shimmered through shafts of golden light. Eleanor laughed softly as cool drops touched her face. Nathaniel removed his coat and held it above her shoulders. "It isn't much. It is enough." They found shelter beneath a sprawling oak whose branches formed a natural canopy. For a while neither spoke. Rain tapped gently upon leaves around them. "I've been meaning to thank you," Nathaniel finally said. "For what?" "For giving my children something I couldn't." "You gave them love." "I gave them grief." "You gave them a father who never stopped trying." He looked away. "I stopped believing I could help them." Eleanor's voice remained calm. "They never stopped believing in you." Nathaniel studied her thoughtfully. "No one has defended me more kindly than you." A comfortable silence settled between them before laughter echoed from nearby bushes. The 3 children burst into view pretending complete innocence. "We found you," Henry declared dramatically. Nathaniel narrowed his eyes. "I'm beginning to suspect we weren't the ones searching." Charlotte tried not to smile. Lily failed completely. That evening, after returning home, the children hurried upstairs carrying something wrapped in blue ribbon. Inside an old cedar chest stored in the attic, Charlotte had discovered a sealed envelope tucked beneath folded baby blankets. Across the front, written in Isabella's graceful handwriting, appeared only 3 words. "For my children." The siblings stared at one another in astonishment. Charlotte carefully unfolded the letter. Their mother's familiar handwriting filled the page with gentle encouragement, reminding them to care for one another, to forgive quickly, and never to fear joy because love was stronger than sorrow. Near the bottom the ink became shakier, yet one unfinished sentence remained unmistakably clear. "If someday a kind woman brings laughter back into your home, do not believe she is replacing me. She is protecting the love I leave behind." The words stopped there, ending abruptly where weakness had stolen Isabella's strength. Tears filled Charlotte's eyes as Henry carefully folded the letter again. Lily pressed it against her heart before whispering, "Mama already knew." Charlotte looked toward the nursery door, determination replacing grief. "We won't tell Papa yet," she said softly. "We'll wait until the perfect moment." None of them noticed elegant footsteps echoing through the distant corridor below, where an unexpected visitor had just arrived at Ravenscroft Palace, asking to speak with the Duke about becoming its next Duchess. Lady Beatrice Ashcombe arrived at Ravenscroft Palace beneath a procession of polished carriages, jeweled attendants, and fluttering silk parasols that announced her importance long before she stepped onto the marble courtyard. At 32, she possessed striking beauty sharpened by relentless ambition. Society praised her elegance, yet behind every graceful smile rested careful calculation. Rumors had followed her through London's grandest drawing rooms, whispering that no title ever satisfied her for long. When she curtsied before Duke Nathaniel Ravenscroft, she offered flawless sympathy for his loss, though her observant eyes lingered upon the palace itself with unmistakable admiration. Nathaniel welcomed her with impeccable courtesy. He assumed she had come merely to discuss charitable work sponsored by neighboring estates. Beatrice encouraged that misunderstanding. She admired the gardens, complimented the architecture, praised the children's education she had never witnessed, and spoke gently about restoring joy to noble households touched by tragedy. Everything she said sounded thoughtful, yet every sentence quietly suggested that Ravenscroft Palace needed a new duchess. Nathaniel remained distant. He thanked her kindness but offered no invitation beyond afternoon tea. From the upstairs gallery, Charlotte silently watched the visitor below. When Beatrice noticed Eleanor crossing the hall carrying Lily's forgotten storybook, the warmth in her smile faded almost imperceptibly. "Who is that young woman?" she asked. "Our governess," Nathaniel answered simply. "I see." The conversation moved elsewhere, but Beatrice's attention did not. Over the following days she found endless reasons to remain at Ravenscroft. She donated books to the library, inspected village schools, organized floral arrangements for the chapel, and accepted every invitation Mrs. Ashcombe politely extended. Whenever Nathaniel was occupied with estate affairs, Beatrice wandered the palace studying its servants, routines, and relationships with unsettling precision. Before long she understood one undeniable truth. The children adored Eleanor. That realization transformed admiration into jealousy. One afternoon Beatrice entered the gardens just as Eleanor helped Lily weave daisy crowns while Henry and Charlotte competed to build the tallest tower from smooth river stones. Their laughter drifted through warm summer air like music. Hidden beneath a pleasant expression, Beatrice watched Lily suddenly abandon her flowers to throw both arms around Eleanor's waist. "I made one for you," Lily exclaimed, placing a tiny daisy crown upon Eleanor's head. Henry laughed. "You look like the Queen of Flowers." Charlotte smiled. "No, the Queen of Spring." Beatrice quietly turned away before anyone noticed her. That evening she began planting rumors with remarkable skill. She never lied outright. Instead she asked carefully chosen questions. "Isn't it unusual that the children have become attached so quickly? How fortunate for an unmarried governess. I wonder whether affection can sometimes become strategic." Servants repeated whispers. Guests embellished them. Within days, neighboring estates buzzed with speculation that Miss Eleanor Whitmore intended to secure the title of Duchess by winning the children's hearts. Eleanor remained blissfully unaware until two visiting ladies deliberately stopped speaking when she entered the drawing room. The silence told her everything. Later that evening Mrs. Ashcombe found Eleanor arranging fresh flowers in the nursery. "You've heard." Eleanor nodded quietly. "I have." "You must ignore foolish gossip." "I wish it were only gossip." The elderly housekeeper frowned. "What do you mean?" Eleanor looked toward the open window where Charlotte and Henry played with Lily below. "The children deserve peace. They have found peace. And now people will say I stole it." Mrs. Ashcombe reached for her hand. "No one who truly knows this family believes such nonsense." Eleanor smiled sadly. Society often matters more than truth. The following afternoon the annual Tenants' Festival filled the estate with cheerful celebration. Families gathered beneath colorful banners while musicians played lively dances across the village green. Nathaniel spent hours greeting farmers and craftsmen. Eleanor remained with the children, helping Lily paint tiny wooden birds while Charlotte judged baking competitions and Henry eagerly joined a friendly archery contest. For a little while, happiness seemed untouchable. Then Beatrice approached a group of influential ladies standing only steps away from Eleanor. She spoke softly enough to appear discreet, yet loudly enough to be overheard. "Some women understand exactly how to win a widower." Another lady laughed politely. "The children are always the easiest path." Eleanor froze. The brush slipped from Lily's tiny hand. Blue paint spilled across the tablecloth. Charlotte's face drained of color. Henry clenched his fists. Nathaniel, occupied across the square, heard none of it. Eleanor quietly cleaned the spilled paint before kneeling beside Lily. "It wasn't your fault." Lily looked frightened. "They're talking about you." "I know. Are they wrong?" Eleanor gently kissed the little girl's forehead. "No. They're mistaken. But mistakes sometimes hurt people." That night Eleanor could not sleep. Moonlight stretched across the wooden floor of her room while the palace rested in complete silence. She thought about Nathaniel's quiet dignity, Charlotte's cautious hope, Henry's slowly returning laughter, Lily's trusting embrace. If the rumors continued, every smile the children had regained might become another weapon for society's cruel imagination. Before dawn she reached her decision. At breakfast she requested a private meeting with Nathaniel in the library. He immediately sensed something was wrong. "You look troubled." "I've come to thank you." His expression tightened. People usually begin farewells that way. She lowered her eyes. I believe it is time for me to leave Ravenscroft. Silence filled the room. Nathaniel stared at her as though he had misunderstood. Leave? The children are healing. Because of you. They no longer need me. They do. They need their father's full attention. They already have it. And they deserve a future untouched by scandal. Nathaniel stepped closer. There is no scandal. There soon will be. I don't care what society says. She finally met his eyes. I do. For Charlotte. For Henry. For Lily. They have already lost enough. Nathaniel searched desperately for words. None came. Eleanor placed a neatly folded resignation letter upon the desk. I'll depart tomorrow morning. She curtsied gracefully before leaving him alone among shelves filled with books that suddenly offered no comfort whatsoever. Mrs. Ashcombe wept quietly after learning the news. The servants moved through the palace with heavy hearts. Charlotte discovered the packed trunk before sunset. No. She ran downstairs searching every room. Henry found Eleanor returning library books. You can't go. I must. Because of those stupid rumors? She gently touched his shoulder. Because I love all of you too much to become the reason anyone hurts you. Henry turned away so she would not see tears gathering in his eyes. Lily refused to believe any of it until bedtime. You'll still read tomorrow? Eleanor forced a smile. Not tomorrow, darling. The little girl's lip trembled. Then tomorrow can stay away. Before sunrise a modest carriage waited quietly before the palace entrance. Mist drifted across the gardens while birds welcomed another beautiful summer morning, entirely unaware that Ravenscroft stood on the edge of losing its heart once again. Eleanor embraced Mrs. Ashcombe before climbing inside. The horses had barely begun moving when Charlotte burst through the front doors still wearing her nightdress. Henry raced after the carriage without stopping to pull on his boots. Little Lily stumbled across the dew-soaked lawn clutching both her mother's blue shawl and the unfinished letter hidden beneath it. Their desperate cries shattered the morning silence, echoing across the estate. Inside his study Nathaniel heard them at last. He looked through the window just in time to see the carriage disappearing beyond the iron gates while his 3 children ran after it with broken hearts, and something inside him finally refused to remain silent any longer. Nathaniel did not think. He moved. The moment he saw Charlotte, Henry, and little Lily running after the departing carriage, every hesitation that had chained him for 3 years shattered. He rushed from his study, descended the grand staircase 2 steps at a time, and crossed the marble entrance hall before startled servants could even open the doors for him. By the time he reached the courtyard, his children were already beyond the iron gates, their desperate voices carried by the cool morning breeze. Eleanor. Please don't leave. The carriage continued rolling along the tree-lined road. Nathaniel mounted the nearest horse without waiting for a saddle. Your Grace, a stable hand called in alarm. But the Duke was already galloping through the open gates. Dust rose behind him as the powerful stallion raced down the winding road. Ahead, the modest carriage remained visible between towering oaks. Nathaniel urged the horse faster until he finally reached the driver. Stop the carriage. The startled coachman pulled the reins. The horses slowed. Silence settled over the road except for heavy breathing and birdsong drifting through the summer trees. Nathaniel dismounted before the carriage had completely stopped. Eleanor stepped down slowly. Neither spoke for several moments. The children finally caught up, breathless from running. Lily immediately wrapped both arms around Eleanor's waist. I knew you'd wait for us. Eleanor held the little girl tightly while fighting tears. Nathaniel looked at the woman standing before him. She seemed exhausted. Not because of the journey. Because of the decision. I cannot allow you to leave like this, he said quietly. You must. I will not. You have responsibilities greater than your own heart. My greatest responsibility is standing right here. She shook her head gently. The rumors will never end. Then let them end with me. They will wound the children. Nathaniel glanced toward Charlotte, Henry, and Lily. They have already been wounded. His voice became steadier. You believed leaving would protect them. I did. It has only reminded them what losing someone feels like. Eleanor lowered her eyes. She had no answer. Nathaniel stepped closer. I am not asking you to stay because this palace needs another governess. He paused. I am asking whether you would come home because 3 children have already chosen you as family. Charlotte quietly took Eleanor's hand. Henry took the other. Little Lily looked upward with hopeful eyes. Our home only laughs when you're there. Eleanor finally broke. Tears slipped silently down her cheeks as she embraced all three children together. Nathaniel watched without interrupting. He realized something beautiful. He had fallen in love long before this morning. He had simply been too frightened to admit it. Eleanor returned to Ravenscroft that afternoon, not as an answer to gossip, not as a future duchess, simply because she could not abandon three children she loved. The weeks that followed transformed the estate. Nathaniel no longer watched from distant doorways. He joined afternoon walks through the gardens. He helped Henry finish birdhouses. He allowed Charlotte to teach him the dance steps she had finally remembered. He listened while Lily proudly explained every flower growing in the memory garden. Evenings once filled with silence slowly became evenings filled with conversation. Servants smiled again. Music drifted through open windows. The palace seemed to breathe after years of holding its sorrow. Meanwhile, Lady Beatrice discovered that whispers alone could no longer divide the family. She made one final attempt. When invitations were announced for Ravenscroft's first summer ball since Isabella's death, society expected Nathaniel to publicly court Beatrice. She arrived wearing an elaborate emerald gown adorned with diamonds that glittered beneath hundreds of crystal chandeliers. Guests whispered approvingly. Surely tonight the Duke would choose a new duchess. Nathaniel welcomed every guest with calm dignity. Yet his eyes repeatedly searched only one doorway. The orchestra began playing. Couples filled the magnificent ballroom. Still, Eleanor had not appeared. Charlotte noticed her father's disappointment. Without saying a word, she smiled toward Henry. Henry nodded. The siblings quietly slipped away. Several minutes later, the enormous ballroom doors slowly opened. Conversation stopped. Every head turned. Eleanor entered wearing an elegant powder blue evening gown Mrs. Ashcombe had secretly altered from one that had belonged to her own mother decades earlier. Delicate embroidery shimmered softly beneath the candlelight. Her chestnut hair was swept into graceful curls, while a single sapphire pendant rested above her heart. She looked beautiful. Not because of jewels, because happiness had quietly returned to her eyes. Nathaniel forgot every guest in the room. He simply stared. Charlotte hurried forward. You came. I promised I'd never disappear without saying goodbye again. Henry grinned. Good. You still owe me carving lessons. Lily laughed. And flower crowns. The orchestra changed melodies. A familiar tune floated gently through the ballroom. Charlotte looked toward Eleanor. Would you dance with us? Without waiting for permission, Lily took Eleanor's right hand. Charlotte took the left. Henry stood proudly beside them, clapping the rhythm exactly as he had done weeks earlier. Together they began laughing as they danced across the polished marble floor. Guests watched in complete silence. Some recognized the melody. It had been Duchess Isabella's favorite. Nathaniel remained standing near the ballroom entrance. Exactly where he had stood the first day he secretly watched Eleanor make his children laugh. Only this time, Charlotte stopped dancing. She walked directly toward him. From the pocket hidden inside her gown, she removed the carefully folded letter. Mama wanted you to have this. Nathaniel recognized Isabella's handwriting immediately. His hands trembled. He unfolded the delicate page. The ballroom became perfectly still. He slowly read every line. His eyes blurred with tears. Then he reached the unfinished sentence near the bottom. For a long moment he could not continue. Finally his voice broke. If someday a kind woman brings laughter back into your home, do not believe she is replacing me. She is protecting the love I leave behind. Silence filled every corner of the ballroom. Many guests quietly wiped away tears. Nathaniel folded the letter carefully. Then he walked toward Eleanor. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Simply with absolute certainty. He stopped before her. Instead of immediately kneeling, he turned toward his children. Do you remember the promise I made your mother? Charlotte nodded. You promised we'd always know love. I failed. Eleanor gently shook her head. No. Nathaniel smiled through tears. I thought protecting their hearts meant never allowing anyone close enough to leave them. He looked directly into Eleanor's eyes. You taught me the opposite. Loving again does not betray the people we lost. It honors them. Only then did he slowly kneel. Not with pride. With gratitude. He held out no crown. No grand title. Only his hand. Eleanor Whitmore. You restored laughter to children who believed it had died forever. You reminded a broken father how to live. I cannot promise a life without sorrow. But I promise a home where joy will always be welcome. Will you marry me? Before Eleanor could answer, Henry hurried forward holding a folded piece of paper. I almost forgot. Charlotte laughed softly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Henry proudly announced, "our family contract." Curious smiles spread throughout the ballroom. Nathaniel accepted the paper. Written in crooked childish handwriting were 5 simple rules. Papa must smile every day. Nobody eats supper alone. Every Sunday is dancing day. Flowers belong in every room. Eleanor belongs with us forever. The ballroom erupted into gentle laughter mixed with quiet tears. Eleanor covered her mouth, overwhelmed. Instead of answering Nathaniel immediately, she accepted the paper, carefully signed her name beneath the children's signatures. Then she looked at Nathaniel. "I think your children proposed before you did." Henry proudly corrected her. "We planned it that way." The entire ballroom laughed. Nathaniel smiled wider than anyone had seen in years. Eleanor finally placed her hand in his. "Yes." The orchestra began playing once more. This time Nathaniel did not watch from the doorway. He stepped onto the dance floor beside Eleanor. Charlotte twirled gracefully. Henry clapped enthusiastically. Lily spun until everyone laughed. Soon the guests themselves joined the dancing, followed by servants invited inside from the corridors, then gardeners, stable hands, cooks, and village musicians who had gathered outside. Noble titles disappeared beneath shared joy as the grand ballroom overflowed with life. Looking around, Nathaniel understood Isabella's final gift had never been the unfinished letter. It had been the courage to let love bloom again without guilt. As the music swelled beneath glittering chandeliers, he drew Eleanor close while his children danced around them, their laughter echoing through Ravenscroft Palace until every silent corridor remembered its purpose. From that night forward, no one spoke of the day laughter died. They remembered only the day one kind woman brought spring back to a family that had forgotten winter could ever end.